Emily Parker grew up in a small town where everyone knew her father, Deputy Sheriff Richard Parker. To the townsfolk, he was a symbol of authority, always dressed sharply in his uniform and quick to take control in any situation. But to Emily, he was just Dad. She admired his confidence and how people seemed to respect him wherever he went. She dreamed of being just like him when she grew up, wearing the same badge and protecting her community. But there was another side to Richard that Emily didn't fully understand as a child. At family dinners, he would sometimes talk about people in ways that made Emily feel uneasy. He often used phrases like, "Some folks just don't belong here." And while he never said anything outright hateful in front of Emily, his tone carried a certain edge that she couldn't ignore. As Emily got older, she noticed how her father treated people differently. He would go out of his way to help certain neighbors while keeping a suspicious eye on others, especially newcomers to the town. Emily shrugged it off at first, thinking, "Dad must know something I don't. He's the law, after all." When Emily turned 16, her father started taking her along on patrol rides. She loved the thrill of riding in the sheriff's car, listening to the crackle of the radio, and watching her father handle situations with authority. But she also noticed how he spoke to people. Some got his friendly smile and helpful tone, while others were met with cold words and sharp warnings. One day, after a tense interaction with a man in town, Emily finally asked, "Dad, why were you so hard on him? He didn't seem to be doing anything wrong." Her father glanced at her, his expression firm but calm. "Emily, there are people you can trust, and there are people you can't. You'll learn that as you get older. Always trust your instincts." Emily nodded, unsure what to make of his words. Deep down, she wanted to believe her father was right, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. As Emily entered adulthood, she carried her father's lessons with her. She enrolled in the police academy, determined to follow in his footsteps and make him proud. Yet, she couldn't help but feel a growing conflict inside her. She wanted to be the kind of officer who treated everyone fairly, but her father's voice lingered in her mind, shaping her instincts and decisions in ways she didn't fully understand. Little did Emily know, this internal battle would soon come to a head, setting her on a path that would challenge everything she believed about herself, her family, and the values she thought she stood for. Emily Parker stood proudly in her police academy graduation uniform. The badge on her chest gleamed under the sunlight, and her father's eyes glistened with pride. Richard Parker had always dreamed of his daughter continuing the family tradition, and here she was, following in his footsteps. Emily felt a mix of pride and nervousness. She had worked hard to earn this moment, but a small voice in her heart reminded her of the doubts she'd carried since she was young. Her first day as an officer was a whirlwind of emotions. The town where she had grown up now felt different. People she had once seen as neighbors now looked at her with either respect or fear, depending on how they viewed the badge. Emily quickly learned that being an officer wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making decisions in moments of uncertainty. Her father's advice rang in her ears during those moments. "Trust your instincts, Emily. Never let anyone question your authority." At first, Emily took that advice to heart. She worked hard to establish herself as a confident officer, eager to earn the respect of her colleagues. Her father's reputation had preceded her, and many of the senior officers commented on how much she reminded them of Richard. "You've got your dad's toughness," one officer said after a particularly tense call. "That's a good thing in this job." But Emily couldn't ignore the growing discomfort she felt. There were times when her instincts didn't match what her father had taught her. She started to notice patterns in how people were treated, patterns that reminded her of her father's selective kindness. One evening, Emily responded to a call about a dispute in a local park. Two teenagers were arguing over a basketball game, and a small crowd had gathered. As Emily approached, she noticed one of the boys backing away, his hands raised in frustration. "Calm down," Emily ordered, trying to keep the situation under control. The boy looked at her, his voice shaking. "We're just talking. Why are you acting like I did something wrong?" Emily paused. The boy's words hit her harder than she expected. She realized she had stepped into the situation assuming he was the problem, without even hearing his side. Later that night, Emily replayed the moment in her mind. Why had she been so quick to judge? She wanted to believe she was being fair, but something about her reaction didn't feel right. Her father's voice echoed in her thoughts. Some people can't be trusted. But for the first time, Emily wondered if that voice was steering her down the wrong path. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to question more of her decisions. She wanted to make her father proud, but she also wanted to trust her own sense of justice. The tension inside her grew stronger, setting the stage for a choice she would soon have to make. A choice that would define her career and her conscience. Emily had always thought of herself as a small-town officer, doing her best to protect her community. But everything changed the day she found herself working at a high-profile event, one that drew the attention of people far beyond her small town. It was a charity gala, held to raise funds for law enforcement programs, and one of the special guests was none other than James Hale, the former FBI director. Hale was a legend in the law enforcement world, known for his tough stance on crime and his role in shaping national security policies. Emily had heard of him before, of course, but meeting him in person was something else entirely. The moment he walked into the event, he exuded power and confidence. Everyone at the gala seemed to be eager to catch a glimpse of him. Emily, as part of the security team, was tasked with keeping the event safe, but she couldn't help but feel nervous being so close to someone so influential. Her role was simple: ensure the safety of all attendees and handle any potential threats. But Emily knew that for someone of Hale's stature, even the smallest misstep could make headlines. As the evening went on, Emily kept a sharp eye on the crowd, making sure nothing went wrong. The tension started to rise when one of the guests caused a small disruption. Emily immediately stepped in, asking the person to calm down and return to their seat. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just another routine situation. But then she noticed Hale walking toward the scene, seemingly unaware of the disturbance she was managing. Her instincts kicked in. She had been taught to always take charge, and in that moment, she wanted to make sure everything was under control before Hale could even realize what was happening. As she quickly moved in to defuse the situation, Emily found herself standing directly in front of Hale. He paused, raising an eyebrow at her sudden, aggressive movement. His calm gaze didn't match the tension in her body. Something about his presence made Emily uneasy. Perhaps it was the power he seemed to radiate, or perhaps it was the way he looked at her, as if silently judging her every action. "Is everything all right here?" Hale asked, his voice calm and measured. Emily nodded, but her response was rushed. "Yes, sir. Just a minor issue. Everything's under control." Hale didn't seem convinced. He glanced around the room, his sharp eyes taking in the details before returning to Emily. "You sure about that? It looks like you might be handling more than you think." For a moment, Emily stood there, stunned. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. She had always been confident, always in control. But Hale's words made her question her own approach. Was she overreacting? Was she trying too hard to prove herself? As the night went on, the interaction weighed heavily on her mind. She found herself looking back at Hale, who moved through the crowd with ease, effortlessly managing to stay composed. Emily couldn't help but feel that his ability to remain calm in such high-stress situations was something she had yet to learn. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. But the seeds of doubt had been planted in Emily's mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to law enforcement than simply being tough and quick to act. And perhaps she wasn't quite as confident in her own abilities as she once thought. The night started like any other. Emily was on duty, keeping an eye on the crowd at another high-profile event. But this time, the stakes were much higher. It was a private fundraiser, and the guest of honor was none other than James Hale, the former FBI director. This wasn't just any event. It was a chance for people to network, discuss important issues, and raise money for law enforcement projects. Emily was there to make sure everything went smoothly, like she always did. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but Emily's focus remained sharp. As part of the security detail, she had been assigned to patrol the hall and keep an eye on any potential threats. It wasn't a dangerous event, but with someone like Hale attending, the security measures were tight. Emily's shift had been uneventful for most of the evening. People mingled, enjoyed their drinks, and listened to speeches. But then, just as the event was nearing its end, things took a turn. The lights suddenly flickered, and a loud noise echoed from the back of the room. Emily's heart raced. Her training kicked in as she quickly assessed the situation, scanning the room for any sign of danger. Before she could react, a figure darted toward the stage. Emily's instincts told her to stop the person immediately. She was the closest officer, and the safety of the guests was her responsibility. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the stage, where Hale was standing, unaware of the sudden disturbance. The figure was close, too close for comfort, and Emily's mind raced. Was this a threat? Should she call for backup? Emily moved quickly. The moment the person was within reach, she reached for her weapon and raised it in their direction, commanding them to stop. The figure froze, their hands still in the air, but Emily didn't lower her gun. She was tense, waiting for any sign that the situation was escalating. Stop. Don't move. Emily's voice was firm, but inside, she was fighting to keep her composure. It was then that she realized what had happened. The figure wasn't a threat at all. It was just a guest, someone who had been trying to reach the stage to speak. Emily's heart dropped. She had acted too quickly, assuming danger without fully assessing the situation. The room fell silent. James Hale, who had been standing a few steps away, watched the scene unfold. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the mistake she had made. Her hand shook as she lowered her weapon, but the damage had already been done. Hale stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Is everything okay, Officer Parker?" he asked, his words measured but with a hint of concern. Emily didn't know how to respond. Her mind was racing, her pride wounded. She had acted rashly, and now everyone in the room had seen it. The guest, who had been nothing more than an excited participant, stood frozen in place, unsure of how to react. "I'm sorry," Emily stammered. I thought you were a threat. I just wanted to keep everyone safe." But the damage wasn't just to the situation. It was to Emily's confidence. For the first time, she questioned whether she had the right instincts for the job. She'd been trained to act quickly, but was she really prepared to handle situations with the level of calm and control that people like Hale seemed to possess? The incident left Emily shaken. As the crowd slowly returned to their conversations, she felt a heavy weight on her shoulders. Her reputation, her confidence, it had all been called into question in a single, heart-pounding moment. The incident at the fundraiser didn't stay quiet for long. It wasn't just the people at the event who saw what happened. Videos of the moment quickly made their way to social media. Emily's misstep, the raised gun, and the confusion was replayed over and over again. The clip went viral within hours, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the officer who had pointed a gun at an innocent guest. The headlines didn't help either. "Officer mistakes innocent man for threat at high-profile event." It didn't take long for Emily to feel the weight of the public's reaction. People who once respected her now questioned her actions. She had made a mistake, but the world didn't care about the details. To them, it was a sign of a bigger problem in law enforcement. Officers too quick to act, too ready to pull their weapons without thinking. Emily's phone started to buzz nonstop, messages flooding in from friends, family, and colleagues. Some messages were supportive, from people who believed she had acted out of an instinct to protect. But the majority of the messages were full of criticism. "How could you make such a mistake?" One message read, "You're supposed to be protecting people, not scaring them." Her colleagues at the station weren't much better. When Emily walked into the precinct the next day, she could feel the eyes on her. Whispers filled the air, and it was clear that things had changed. It wasn't just the public who had questions. The department had to take action too. A few days after the incident, Emily received a call from her supervisor. "We're starting an internal investigation," he said, his voice tense. "We need to determine if your actions were in line with department protocols." The word stung. Emily had always prided herself on following the rules. She had worked so hard to get where she was. But now, it seemed like all of that was in jeopardy. An internal investigation meant her actions would be scrutinized, and any mistakes she had made would be exposed. As the investigation began, Emily tried to keep her head down, hoping that things would calm down. But the pressure only seemed to grow. News outlets continued to report on the incident, with many questioning how an officer could be so quick to act without assessing the situation properly. Emily was painted as an example of the dangers of law enforcement officers who didn't think before they acted. She tried to focus on her work, but it was hard. Her confidence had taken a major hit, and the more she thought about the incident, the more it haunted her. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, wondering where she had gone wrong. Was it the rush of the situation? Had she been too eager to prove herself? To make matters worse, Emily's father, Richard, publicly defended her. "She did what she had to do," he said in an interview. "That's what being an officer is about, protecting the public, no matter the cost." But his words didn't offer Emily the comfort she expected. Instead, they only made her feel more isolated. The more her father pushed his point, the more she felt like she was being forced into a corner. The investigation continued, and with each passing day, Emily felt more like an outsider in her own life. The pressure was building, and she didn't know how much longer she could handle it. As the days passed, the fallout from the incident continued to swirl around Emily Parker. She had once been a rising star in the local law enforcement community, someone who was seen as following in her father's footsteps. But now, she was being scrutinized from all sides, both by the public and her colleagues. The internal investigation dragged on, and the pressure was mounting. Emily found herself constantly checking the news, hoping for a break from the endless coverage of the event. But every time she turned on the television or scrolled through her phone, there it was, another headline, another video clip, another reminder of her mistake. The situation was quickly becoming bigger than just one mistake. It had turned into a symbol for everything people thought was wrong with law enforcement. Her colleagues at the precinct were no longer the same. Some whispered behind her back, and others avoided making eye contact with her altogether. Emily could feel the distance growing between her and the people she had once worked so closely with. Those who had once admired her now treated her with suspicion, unsure whether she was the same officer they had known before the incident. One afternoon, while Emily was working a shift at the station, she overheard two officers talking in the break room. "I don't know how she's still here," one officer muttered. "If it were anyone else, they'd be out of a job by now." The other officer nodded in agreement. "Yeah, the public's not going to let this go. She's not going to get away with it." The words hit Emily harder than she expected. She had been trying to hold her head high, hoping that things would eventually blow over, but the reality was that the damage had already been done. She was now a target, and not just from the public, but from her own colleagues as well. The thought of losing her job, of being forced out of the career she had worked so hard for, terrified her. At home, things were just as difficult. Her father, Richard, had become more vocal in his defense of her. He appeared on local news, passionately declaring that Emily had done what she thought was best in a high-stress situation. But his words didn't seem to help Emily. Instead of feeling comforted by his support, she felt even more isolated. It was as if her father didn't understand how deeply the incident had affected her. "You can't just keep defending me," Emily said to him one night, her voice trembling. "I need to figure this out on my own." Her father looked at her, his face a mix of confusion and frustration. "I'm just trying to help, Em. People are being unfair. You've done nothing wrong." But Emily wasn't so sure anymore. She had never thought of herself as someone who made rash decisions. After weeks of endless media coverage and internal investigations, Emily Parker was at a crossroads. The incident that had caused so much chaos had left her emotionally drained and unsure of herself. It wasn't just the public outrage or the whispers at the precinct that weighed on her. It was the nagging doubt that she had made a serious error in judgment. For someone who had prided herself on being strong, capable, and able to handle any situation, the mistake felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. One evening, after a particularly tense day at work, Emily received a surprising phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and instantly recognizable. It was James Hale, the former FBI director, the man she had inadvertently pointed a gun at during the fundraiser. "Officer Parker," Hale's voice came through the line. "I've been following the coverage of the incident, and I wanted to speak with you personally." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had expected that her mistake would be swept under the rug by those in charge, but she didn't expect to hear from Hale himself. Her first instinct was to feel defensive, to justify her actions. But something in his tone made her pause. There was no anger, no judgment, just calm understanding. "I'm sorry, sir," Emily began, her voice shaking slightly. "I never meant for any of that to happen. I was just trying to protect everyone." Hale was silent for a moment before responding. "I know you were trying to protect the people at that event, Emily. But sometimes the best way to protect people." As the investigation continued, Emily Parker found herself at a crossroads. It had been weeks since the incident, but the consequences of her mistake were still very much a part of her daily life. She had made it through the toughest part, the public outrage, the media frenzy, and the whispered doubts from her colleagues. But now she was faced with the most important question of all. What came next? Emily spent a lot of time thinking about her future. Her past decisions had been clouded by fear, uncertainty, and the pressure to live up to her father's legacy. But now she knew she had to forge her own path. The lessons she had learned from the incident, from her conversation with Hale, and from her own reflections made her realize something crucial. She wasn't just in law enforcement to follow orders or protect people by any means necessary. She was there to make thoughtful decisions, to act with patience, and to protect not only the community, but also the values that had first drawn her to this line of work. One morning, Emily received an email from her supervisor, asking her to meet with him. The thought of another confrontation made her stomach turn, but she knew it was part of the process. She had to face whatever came next, no matter how uncomfortable. When she entered his office, her supervisor looked at her with a serious expression. "Emily, after a thorough investigation and reviewing the incident, we've decided not to terminate your employment," he said, pausing for a moment. Emily held her breath, unsure of what he would say next. "But we believe you need additional training. You'll be required to attend courses on de-escalation, judgment in high-pressure situations, and emotional control." Emily nodded, grateful for the second chance. It wasn't a free pass. It was a reminder that growth would take time, but it was still a chance to prove herself. She had learned the hard way that being the good officer wasn't about rushing to conclusions. It was about making decisions that protected people, even if it meant taking a step back to think before acting. The next few weeks were full of difficult lessons. Emily attended classes, participated in group discussions, and spent time reflecting on the choices she had made. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she had been shaped by her past. The influence of her father, the pressure of being an officer, and the instinct to act without fully assessing a situation. But as she grew, she started to see the world differently. She learned to ask more questions, to listen more closely, and to take a breath before reacting. It wasn't easy. Some days, Emily felt frustrated, as if she were starting over. But each day, she grew stronger and more confident in her ability to make better choices. She began to rebuild her relationships with her colleagues, who saw her effort to change. Slowly, the whispers and doubts began to fade, replaced by a sense of respect for the hard work she was putting in. Emily knew there was still a long road ahead. She still had to prove herself, not only to others but also to herself. But she no longer felt the need to live up to her father's expectations or the legacy of being a tough officer. Instead, she focused on being a thoughtful, patient, and fair one. And as time passed, Emily realized something that had once seemed impossible. She had found her own path, one that was built on understanding, growth, and a commitment to do better every single day. The weeks that followed were a turning point in Emily Parker's career. With the weight of her past mistakes still on her mind, she was determined to prove that she could learn from it, grow, and become the officer she had always wanted to be. Her training on de-escalation and emotional control had helped her realize that her previous instincts, while driven by a desire to protect, hadn't always been the best approach. Now she knew that being an officer wasn't just about reacting. It was about responding thoughtfully and with patience. Emily's supervisor had made it clear that while she wasn't being fired, her future in law enforcement depended on her ability to change. She wasn't being given a free pass, and she knew this was her chance to redeem herself. Every day, she reminded herself that she had the power to rebuild her reputation. It wouldn't be easy, but Emily was ready to put in the hard work. One afternoon, Emily was assigned to a routine patrol shift with a new partner. His name was Officer Lucas Harris, a quiet but experienced officer who had seen his fair share of tense situations. Emily had heard good things about him. He was known for staying calm even when things got heated. As they drove through the streets together, Emily couldn't help but feel a bit of nervousness. She wanted to prove herself, but she knew that her past mistake was still something that loomed over her. "Don't worry too much about what happened before," Officer Harris said, noticing Emily's unease. "Everyone makes mistakes. It's what we do after that counts." His words were simple, but they struck a chord with Emily. She realized that she had been holding herself back, afraid that every mistake would be held against her forever. But Harris's words gave her a new perspective. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, learning, and growing. As the shift continued, Emily found herself more focused on the work than on her past failures. When they responded to a call about a possible break-in, Emily found herself thinking clearly and acting swiftly without hesitation. She communicated with her partner, listened to the information provided, and assessed the situation calmly. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt confident in her decisions. When the call was resolved safely, Officer Harris gave her a small nod of approval. "You did well, Parker. I think you're on the right track." The compliment meant more to Emily than he could know. It wasn't just about doing her job. It was about proving to herself that she could overcome her past mistakes and move forward with integrity. She realized that redemption didn't come from avoiding mistakes. It came from acknowledging them and using them to become better. Over time, Emily's efforts began to pay off. Her colleagues saw the changes she was making, and while some still questioned her, more and more people began to trust her again. The whispers faded, replaced by respect for the officer who had faced her own flaws head-on and was working to improve. Looking back on everything, Emily understood that redemption was a process. She wasn't perfect, and she knew that she still had a long way to go. But as she continued her work, she felt a sense of pride that was different from the one she had felt before. This pride was earned, not given. It was the pride of someone who had learned from their mistakes and was determined to be better. And as Emily drove through the streets, doing her job with a renewed sense of purpose, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't defined by her past mistake. She was defined by the way she chose to move forward.